stunning looks than swift.
How has this happened? How has this formidable team had such a poor title defence, Tom?
Well, I think that's a conversation that's going to take more than just a half an hour or 45 minutes. There's a lot to unpack, but I think the first thing that sort of springs to my mind is how in any team's preparation for a World Cup, you basically really know what your core side is 6 months out. And I think England had a fair idea what that was, but suddenly, on the eve of the World Cup, when everyone's scrambling to, submit their final 15 names into the ICC for the World Cup, Ben Stokes puts his hand up and says, well, hang on, I'm available. And I think that just sort of throws one of the things that can throw the balance of the side and also the stability of certain players. There's a number of players that we were talking about prior to this World Cup. This is England's team that their position in the side were questioned. Dawood Malan, for instance, who's their leading run scorer, who's been their leading run scorer for many years in this format of the game. Suddenly his position was questioned. There's a lot of talk around Brook as well, to whether he should be in the side or not in the side. So I think that there's a lot of confusion leading into this World Cup for England.
Why don't you extend on that and how much now sort of that adds up given the start England have had?
Yeah, the preparation wasn't great, but I think, unfortunately, and Tom will know because he's been coaching in England, there are a lot of formats of English cricket, and the amount of cricket England play around the world in a calendar year is huge, and one format is always going to suffer. If you look into going into 2019, England were the best team in the world in this format, but from a test point of view, Joe Root kept getting not the team he wanted, and culminating that year and a half ago, I remember being on the field in the Caribbean interviewing Joe about, is this the last game you're going to captain England? He was a shadow. The individual was a shadow of his former self. And I think the test team had suffered during that period of time. So I think there is always that. Then there is the preparation hasn't been great going in. Ben Stokes putting his hat in the ring as a batter only and not as an all-rounder, which then balances the dynamics of the side. That goes awry. And I also look at it, England were at their peak in 2019. Their players were at their peak. The last game, England's average age was 33 and a half. Yeah. So in 2019, these players were at their peak right at the very time.
It's an ageing side now.
It's an ageing side who, if you look at Jason Roy, got left out just before his body had let him down. There's one or two others who have fallen by the wayside from an age point of view, and performance have let them down. And unfortunately, something we couldn't legislate for, there's 5 or 6 of them fallen by the wayside from a body point of view during the biggest stage possible, and that's this last month in the World Cup. They haven't performed.
Sorry to interrupt, but I've been playing county cricket since last couple of years, and I've been part of the domestic one-day competition as well. So there are times where you're losing out players from one-day competition to 100 ball, and that's where I feel as a team, when I was playing for Sussex, we didn't lose too many players, but some of the other counties, they lost too many players in 100 ball competition. Whereas they are not playing enough domestic one-day competition. Do you think that could be a reason?
There is that, but I don't think there's many players around the world top players.
Yeah,
the big stars.
Cricket,
not many players play listed cricket. So I don't think, as much as you want to try and find excuses, you want to try and find the magic one to say, well, why is England being poor? Some of their players just haven't performed. They've lost form at the big crucial time. I don't think it's because I haven't played 50 over cricket.
Yep.
I just think it literally is. 4 or 5 of these players haven't performed on the big stage, and a lot of it, and we'll get onto it probably a little bit later, is about what's England gone wrong in this World Cup. Yep. Their new ball, their power play with bat and power play with ball has let them down, which has a knock-on effect for the rest of the 50 overs. Yep. And I think because of that, so to try and make excuses for them in Lister and 50 over cricket, English cricket at this minute is in a crossroads where they need to find a way of formulating red ball and white ball, whichever formats they want to play. And until they get that right, it'll be a hindrance, but it can't be an excuse.
Fair enough, and I know we will connect these and analyse this further as the tournament goes deeper, but we were almost looking at England as perhaps the team to learn from over the last few years because of the revolution and radical change they made, separating their white and red ball structures. You almost think that the formats should not clash now, given how they've distinguished the setups. and yet seems to have come at an odds quite soon in this revolutionary process as well.
Yeah, but I think when you look at it if you look at it, red ball and the white ball, England played 50 Test matches in the last cycle, where Australia played 35, I think. South Africa played 24. Yeah, these are 5-day games. They're not just they're not 1-day games. They're 5-day games with preparation and tours to go with that. So then that has a knock-on effect to who is available for your 1-day trip, and then who's available for your 20-over games. And I think because of that, England have built this white ball team over a period of time, which you have to trust that they're your best players. Yeah. These are England's best 15 players going into the World Cup. And I think sometimes when you have got an aging side, you possibly trust them for that one more tournament, that one more big stage, and you don't quite, and it's brave if you identify, oh, he might be over the hill, oh, he might be over the hill. What you need there is strong leadership and direction. England changed their white ball coach in the last sort of 12 to 18 months, and the greatest captain that England's had in white ball cricket has left in the last 12 to 18 months. So with this side being like it is, an aging side, would it be the same 15 to come under Morgan? I'm not so sure, because he might have seen it earlier, like he does with Alex Hales. I'm not picking him. Yeah. You know, all these different decision-making points you have to find. Unfortunately, I think you pull that into the melting pot and you get where you are with England.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, if you look at just historically how poor a start this might be for England after 5 games now, and coming up against a team like India, we remember what 2015 did, not just for the kick that English cricket needed to transform into a world-beating side in white ball cricket, but they had won 1 out of 5 back in Australia, New Zealand, and well, then you have to go to 2016. So this is nearing or soon going to be, if they go down to India today, their worst start to a World Cup. Just to, I guess we'll have this conversation in phases, Tom, but as we try to just close out this phase, can it just happen that a really good team has a bad couple of weeks? Or is that not acceptable for at least a defending champion, or in England, or in Australia, or perhaps even India?
You certainly can have a situation where you have a number of players that are out of form at the same time, and there's also, you might have a couple of players that are carrying niggles that are playing, but they're not at their very best physically. That you do have situations like that. I don't know whether that is the issue with England. To be honest with you, it's probably the only time I'm ever going to get on the front foot to Steve Harmison, but I'm going to get on the front foot. And I just don't wear a lot of the excuses, because to me, I question whether this is the best white ball team that they've got out there. There's a lot of very good white ball players that have just about to, given the opportunity, burst onto the scene for England. Players like Phil Salt, Will Jacks. There's plenty of them around. England have got a great depth of white ball cricket in England. But I think that, and a number of the players that are on this particular trip aren't Test players either. You've got Butler, you've got Moeen Ali. Okay, he got called back suddenly for Ashes. You've got, Curran, who's not playing, Livingston, and Milan. There's many of them that are just purely white ball cricketers. So, to me, England have, made a real mash of this particular tournament, purely because they've come into it a little bit disarrayed and disorientated with regards to what is their best combination, and at the same time they've got players out of form.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but I'd throw the thing I'd throw back at you, Tom, would be, is you as a coach, director of cricket, if you've had Johnny Bairstow and Moeen Ali in your lineup, won the World Cup, and they are probably 2 stellar names, would you drop, because the 2 names you mentioned, in Will Jackson and Phil Salt, would you pick Phil Salt over Johnny Bairstow, and would you pick Will Jacks over Moeen Ali? I think that's the point I was trying to make, is I think this tournament is just one tournament too many for possibly an aging older side, but it would take a brave man to leave out the sort of the guys that won in 2019.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't have picked Moeen Ali for the Test series. Moeen Ali made it very clear that he retired from Test cricket, and for me, that was a poor selection. For him to be considered as the second best spinner in England, because Jack Leach, suddenly was injured prior to the beginning of the Ashes. I felt that was, an interesting call as it was, but I get your point.
Yeah, I guess there are so many things that are worth going deeper into here when it comes to England. Whether at times there is an element of sentiment also that unfortunately had this team tied down. Saw it with the West Indies in the T20 World Cup. They wanted one hurrah for Gale and Bravo. India in 2007 thought we were going in with our best team. There were too many issues off the field, but you wanted that patch of Dravid, Tendulkar to go. It's harder at times to live up to being champions or defending champions. It's sometimes easier to win a World Cup than it is to follow up a World Cup.
It is, and I think you just got to listen to Owen Morgan's comments in the last sort of 48 hours saying there's something not quite right in this dressing room. Well, he'll know that because he's still part of this dressing room, and he's in India, and he's on the ground. So there's something isn't quite right in there. I just look at this England team, and you look at, you pick fault, try and pick fault, you try and pick what's happened. They've gone from a very laid-back coach in Test cricket in Brendan McCullum, very laid-back coach in Trevor Bayliss, in what built success, and Matthew Mott seems to be a bit more a little bit more analytical, a little bit more stats-driven. Like the game is going a bit more stats-driven, and are these older players who have played with more, I think, bit more freedom and bit more fluid in their performance? Is there a crossover that something has changed inside, and that's just an excuse that players like to make, because if you give a chance of a player to make an excuse, Tom will tell you as a coach, a player will make the excuse. They will make it every single time.
Still have an active player. Let's double check that.
And look, I feel that there's no excuse. There are times where you don't perform well, and you just have to be honest within the dressing room that things are not going your way. Yeah. How do you bounce back? And that should be the chat rather than finding excuses, because excuse is not going to help you. What can help is try and rebuild. You still have an opportunity to win games, and how you do that should be the question.
Stunning looks, then swift.